All right, welcome back to the channel. So it seems like Jaron Ennis might be chasing Errol Spence Jr. because it looks like he's going to pick a former Errol Spence victim, Chris Van Heerden, for his next fight. I'm telling you, this kid is the real deal, and you should, if not expect, hope for a real fight between Jaron Ennis and Errol Spence Jr. coming up in not too distant the future. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. So this is the type of video that I absolutely love doing because I do believe in this kid, Jaron Boots Ennis, and I think that Jaron Boots Ennis is going to be the best welterweight on the planet before long, and he might just be, depending on his work ethic and depending on his chin, a once-in-a-lifetime type of fighter, and I'm hoping that that journey of realization for boxing fans starts at his next fight and ends when Ennis actually fights the top guys in the welterweight division. And I do believe he's going to be able to do that much sooner than a lot of people think. Now, Jaron Ennis was supposed to be fighting Thomas Dulorme. That was going to be a great, man, that fight right there for me, if he got rid of Thomas Dulorme, that's going to put him in the top 5, top 6 welterweights right there. Because Thomas Dulorme is a very solid fighter. I think we just saw him fight Jamal James, right? So he's Thomas Dulorme is at that level of welterweight, like a like a little bit less than Ugas, little bit less than Ugas. I think he's better than better than like a Jesse Vargas, but he is legitimately, if not a contender, a high-level gatekeeper, right? And so when I heard that Jaron Ennis was fighting Thomas Dulorme, I was like, cool. Now he's starting to step it up. We can start saying after this fight, look, if Keith Thurman wants to fight with Errol Spence, Keith, fight Jaron Ennis, right? Sean Porter, fight Jaron Ennis. Errol Spence, fight Jaron Ennis. Terrence Crawford, fight Jaron Ennis. If he beats Thomas Dulorme, I'm telling you, that is exactly where I was going to start going, especially if he really dominated Thomas Dulorme, right? And made him look like he was just a different level fighter from Thomas Dulorme. Look, man, that kid is going to be ready to go. But unfortunately, Thomas Dulorme came up with the virus, right? And at the time of the recording of this, it looks like that fight's not going to be made, that it's going to be Chris Van Heerden. And in my opinion, Chris Van Heerden works for Jaron Ennis in a very similar fashion, but it actually might be better from a visual standpoint, because you then get to see, like, the Thomas Dulorme fight. Errol Spence Jr. hasn't fought Thomas Dulorme, right? And you see fighters do these type of things when they're aiming at a fighter. Take, for example, when Manny Pacquiao and Top Rank were trying to sell the idea that Manny Pacquiao was the guy that was going to beat Floyd Mayweather Jr., what they did was they had Manny Pacquiao fight a bunch of the same guys that Floyd Mayweather Jr. had just beaten, and then compared the victories, right? And led up and tried to lead people to the conclusion that because Manny Pacquiao beat guys like Ricky Hatton, because he beat Cotto and he beat Oscar De La Hoya, right? And he beat them badly and might have beaten them more severely than than Floyd Mayweather did. That would make the, hate to say it, casual-minded boxing fan think, oh, well, since Manny Pacquiao beat up Miguel Cotto, he might actually beat up Miguel Cotto before Floyd Mayweather Jr. did. But you get the general point, because Manny Pacquiao beat up Cotto worse than Mayweather did. Oh, that means that Manny Pacquiao's a better fighter than Mayweather. That triangle theory type of thing. Well, if you have Jaron Ennis running through the likes of Chris Van Heerden, Chris Algieri, goes and has a fight with like Sean Porter, and he knocks out and stops Sean Porter, then people are gonna be like, oh man, yeah, this dude is actually colder than Errol Spence Jr. He's actually colder than Keith Thurman, let's see this guy. Let's see what they're going to do and fight against each other. That's the type of thing that they do. So for the Chris Van Heerden fight for Jaron Ennis, it might actually create for visuals that are more attractive than, say, the Thomas Dulorme fight. Because if you look at some of the great Chris Van Heerden getting beat up by Errol Spence Jr. was one of the best of Errol Spence Jr.'s fights. I love the way that he handled that dude, because it wasn't like Chris Van Heerden could take a lot of the contact. He could take a lot of the shots because he's a big guy that fought at 154. Similar to like the guy that Abreu that Jaron Ennis just fought, right? And if you look at Jaron Ennis' record, dude, he's fighting guys that are up there, even though the weight class is at 147. He's not fighting small 147s. He's fighting guys that are at 154 and could probably, like Abreu, could have probably paid 160, right? So to see how Jaron Ennis handles that and be able to visually compare that to the way Errol Spence Jr. handled it, it's going to create a lot of public interest in Jaron Ennis, because people just don't know the difference, and they don't pay attention to like how many years it's been and between the fights and how much wear and tear a fighter's taken between the fights. Case in point is like what Terrence Crawford did with Kell Brook, right? And actually that's a really good example of the whole thing, because Terrence Crawford did it with Errol Spence. They got a common opponent now, right? Same thing that Gervonta Davis did to Terrence Crawford. They've got a common opponent. You see how the people compare that? Compare them to each other. So that's what we'll get with Jaron Ennis and Errol Spence Jr. Now, as far as the fight, actually happening itself, or like how that would transpire, I do believe that is the case, that Jaron Ennis, I don't think Jaron Ennis is going to get beat by any of these guys. I don't, right? But Canelo is probably going to be Errol Spence Jr.'s next target, if he has sense, right? So I don't see Errol Spence Jr. staying at 147. I don't see him staying there much longer. I'm listening to what Derek James is saying about the Canelo Alvarez being the biggest fight that could be made in all of boxing. Man, if I'm Errol Spence Jr., dude, I go straight to the Canelo Alvarez fight. Go straight to it. I'm not going to the Sean Porter fight. I'm not going to the Terrence Crawford fight. I'm going to the Canelo Alvarez fight, because right there, that's $30 million and $30 million. That's just a ton of money. But that's not going to be at 147. That's going to be at 160, right? Errol's not going to go all the way up to 168 for Canelo. But when that happens, if and when that happens, that means Jaron Ennis, the welterweight division is open for Jaron Ennis at that point in time. And I do believe that if Errol leaves, the rest of these guys are going to leave too. Danny's probably going to go to 154. Sean's going to go to 154 and try to back up that craziness he's talking. And those guys can all get dealt with by Jermell Charlo. But that's going to leave the 147-pound division open. And in my opinion, it's just wide open for my man, for Jaron Ennis. Especially if you consider the people that are going to come up and come into that division, like Josh Taylor, like Jose Ramirez. Mikey Garcia is probably going to still stay there. Those type of guys. Teofimo Lopez is going to wind up at 147. Devin Haney eventually is going to wind up at 147. If Jaron Ennis as a young dude, if he can have the discipline to maintain that weight and because he's a big 147, if he can maintain that weight all the way till say for another six fights, right? Another 6-7 fights. He will completely dominate the 147-pound division. And then if Errol Spence Jr. is able to beat Canelo and he's at the 160, then I believe that fight is something that's realistic and could be made once those guys really, once it gets to that point. But I have big dreams, man, not big dreams, man. I got big hopes for Jaron Ennis. The only thing that I think could hold back Jaron Ennis, in my opinion, is Jaron Ennis' chin and Jaron Ennis' work ethic. If Jaron Ennis is really if he grinds and doesn't get the big head and continues to improve his skills and looks, for how he can improve, man, I just don't see any of these guys beating him. Now, I know that there are guys, though, however, that I should mention, that not a lot of people talk about. And that's guys like Gary Antoine Russell and Rashidi Ellis, right? So, but, the chances of them getting Rashidi Ellis, Gary Antoine Russell, and and Jaron Ennis getting really good fights in 147, that's how the world should be. But that seems like a lot of color in that division for these dudes to really push that. But anyway, that's my take on the matter. And I certainly hope at one point in time we get to see these two great fighters fight one another, because I think that would be a spectacular fight. But anyway, that's my take on the matter. You let me know yours. And with that, I'm out. Peace.